All right, I'll give George a cue because he likes to know when we're going to start. All right, so another episode of Rest in Pitch Face. Pleased to welcome Andy Crossley as a guest today.
Hello.
So Andy is the CTO and director at Oakland, client of ours. So we're here today to wax lyrical about why thinking differently is an asset in leadership and in tech specifically.
Yep.
And what it means in the dynamic of leadership. I guess you've got a lot of experience with that in the context of tech. So it'd be good to dig into the differences that you've got versus the other directors in the business and how it works.
Yes. It's certainly been a very different mix. So there's four of us. If I give a sort of overview of Oakland, relatively small business, literally up the road from you guys in Leeds. So about 100 people, but four directors that run the company sort of day to day. And all of us from similar backgrounds, but very different backgrounds, actually. So, two directors, ex Big Four, Big Five sort of consultancy type world. One who was on a medical sort of route originally, and then was sort of drawn to the business. And then me, slightly different. So, started off with generally pretty crap A levels and GCSEs. Found myself in university, not by accident, but sort of making a choice about going and doing something that was a bit more off the wall. I was looking at doing sports, thinking about going to America or business management back in the day. And that saw me good as a degree, but I did the usual thing of those sort of degrees. You sort of get to year 3, 4-year course, and start looking at all the grad programs, and it's the usual like Accenture, PwC, all that sort of stuff. And back in the day, there was a company called Syntegra that was a subsidiary of BT, spun off. I think it was created and then spun off and sort of kept at arm's length for quite a while. And think consulting and systems integration, so quite a broad set of what they did, but very entrepreneurial. So you had quite a lot of freedom, even on the graduate program. You did sort of 6 months around the business, but you were not treated like a grad, really. You were sort of just in you go, like, sort of come and work alongside us, go figure it out. And there was bits that were more creative than others. So if you went into like cybersecurity bit, obviously you can't be too creative there. You have to sort of follow the rules a bit more. But very much sort of opened my eyes to what you can do when you're sort of more unconstrained. And I ended up working in a couple of smaller teams that their job was trying to think about what the company did next, what sort of next proposition. Very, very small. So a lot of it never saw the light of day, as you would imagine. Some of it was quite leading, not like super leading edge, but I remember we were one of the first teams in the country to get hold of original three 3G phones that could do video calls. They were shit. They just kept stopping all the time. But to walk around with a flip phone that I could see you on. Yeah. You were only upstairs or downstairs. It wasn't like we cannot do today. But that was the sort of thing we got involved in. But it was, the person around that department was like, well, have a think. What's the business case? Off you go. And so that gave me like an experience probably that I would not have got in an Accenture or PwC or any of those, because they would have been much more,
too much of a framework.
Yeah. And so, throughout my career, sort of followed a bit of a pathway like that. And I guess I've always tried to, or I generally think in an unconstrained way, sort of like think, like, how do we do it? Not, I can't do it. And I guess as I've gone through my career, you sort of try to pick up where that might have come from. I don't know whether it's just me or the way I'm made or whatever. But when I was really young, I used to do athletics a lot. And I don't know whether as part of that sort of sporting, you read a lot about sports, and they generally, in training and sort of pushing you, is very much a can-do attitude, not a can't do or won't do. And probably had that sort of, beaten into me from a young age. But I think it does give a very different balance to the four of us. And we joke that, you know, I'll sell stuff and think about it later, which is a cartoon of what tends to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just having somebody that will break some of the assumptions or challenge some of the assumptions is quite useful. Now, equally, you know, I can't be left unattended sometimes and need somebody to like rein me back in. But I think that gives a good balance, especially in our world where it's, you know, it's data, it's tech, it's moving so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you are a bit too controlled, if you like, that can sometimes hold you back, in my view.
How were you in school? Obviously, school is quite structured and it's quite constrained, and there's a curriculum to follow, and you're taught a certain way. How did you push against that?
I don't think I pushed against the structure, but I certainly found, I think I found, like, again, looking back, I found subjects that were a bit more open, probably easier. So as school went on, particularly like through A-levels, I found things like maths harder, some of the sciences harder, English, art, drama, things like that. They were a bit more free, I guess, in terms of you're open to your own interpretation. You can think for yourself. You can be a bit more unbounded. Probably found them easier. I could apply myself to maths to a certain level, but it, you know, people say like maths clicks sort of thing. It never really did. And so erred towards those types of subjects. From an ease point of view, sort of, you know, back in our day, you sort of didn't get as much choice in the subjects you did. But yeah, probably I wasn't against like the rules, so to speak. But I think the subjects that I felt were easier. It's like things like those that sort of carried an exam, but also had like research, or you did a case study.
Yeah.
So you had a bit more freedom to think, rather than what I didn't like was or struggled, I think, with, right, you've got an hour, you've got to answer 35 questions, go. And that very rigid, structured, you know, a lot of it was you had to remember everything in quite a structured way, so suffered. And similar in university, some of the subjects where you had a much more equal weighting of case study type work and written work and exams probably suited me best.
Yeah, I think I always look at school and think I would have described myself as like almost like a non-conformist with school, super just going off-piste, doing my own thing regardless of what structure was given to me, but still capable of then doing the lesson in the like last 10 minutes of the lesson. Yeah. And I think that's carried through in being able to develop that into challenging the right things at the right time.
Yeah.
And that's how I think I would describe my response to curriculum and structured learning. I think as you get older and you develop a bit more freedom and you build up a set of skills and you lean into it, the capability of timing, I think, is how I would describe that evolution slightly. It's
weird though, because I've found probably when I was younger, so I didn't really do team sports. So most of the sports I did or felt comfortable with on my own. So athletics is a very singular sport, if you like, or solo sport. And probably didn't like in a team sport, team training. My view is it's very drills based, because you're a team. You have to sort of know where each other is and all that sort of stuff. Whereas it's like run around a track as fast as you can, sort of thing. But if I fast forward to particularly like the last 3 or 4 years, maybe a bit more, but that came with not a confidence, but I didn't have self-doubt in the same way. Whereas as I've got older, although you've built up that experience and you sort of, you know, certain things or whatever, there's a weird point at which then self-doubt creeps in, even though you've been doing it for a long time. So it's then taken the last 5 years of my career to be more confident that is a thing, and you can, like you say, timing and when you use it as a skill. Whereas I always doubted it as like, well, I have to be more rigid or more structured or more, be more like them. And probably as a kid never really felt like that. Whereas I think as I've got older, you sort of, whether you become more aware of your surroundings, and the sort of different skills around you. I think sort of fortunate that I grew up in a space where you're only exposed to so many people. So you could certainly in athletics, I was very fortunate to get to being a big fish in a small pond, and then as you get older, you realise you're a very small fish in a very, very, very big pond. Just exposes you to stuff that, again, it didn't took a really long time to realise they were learning points, and how do I use those? So, this person thinks like this. Well, that's not, I don't need to think like them, but how do I work with them to get the best outcome as a pair or a four or a whatever, rather than feeling like I need to be more like them to fit in, which certainly as I became more involved in the leadership of Oakland, sitting around the table with the other directors, I've been there 11 years this summer, spent a good chunk of that time wondering why I'm there and sort of don't fit at this table, which is hard sometimes to unpick.
It bleeds into, there's a lot of conversation over the last couple of years about imposter syndrome. It bleeds into that kind of mindset, doesn't it, where you question your value in the room. But I think it comes from self-awareness and then also developing your own knowledge. But I think it takes a lot sometimes to zoom out a little bit when you're in those situations and back yourself.
Yeah.
I've definitely struggled with that in the past, where it's just, you question your own capability. And like you say, you sort of lean into, I need to try and speak their language, not mine.
Yes. Yeah. And change yourself to adapt to what's in front of you, rather than be yourself. And I don't know. I've felt it really pulls you, like personally, sort of real tension between an imposter syndrome, I need to be more like them or be better, or I'm not good enough, versus believing in yourself to be good enough, versus like you find myself sort of getting almost going, I'm starting to get big headed, I need to take a step back again. And you sort of oscillate between them, which is weird. I've never really liked people like that. When I was growing up, you get a load of kids who just sort of had a level of confidence way beyond their years. Now that's usually a coping mechanism rather than anything else. But always been really hesitant to sort of go, I can do this, because for me that you start to err into big-headedness or arrogance rather than confidence. And there is a fine line, but sort of often found like I've skipped the confidence step, and you overcompensate, and I feel like I've gone into like arrogance step, and you like need to pull yourself back, and that's been quite hard.
I think there's a balance between being self-assured and arrogant. Was there a point, or has there been a point, where that approach and that sort of ability to think a little bit unconventionally has reined that in?
I think it's probably done the opposite sometimes, but I think that's one of the learnings, particularly over the last year. I think is more, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. So some of the ideas I come up with, or challenges I'll present, and why can't we do that, or why are we not going faster, or why can't we think bigger? It's less about that question in itself, is how is that delivered to somebody? How would they take it? So if it's delivered in the wrong way, they take that as like almost aggressive and sort of arrogant, of like, well, come on, why are you not going faster? I would go faster. Whereas done in the right way, it can be supportive. It can be challenging in a supportive way, of like, so have you thought about how we could do this faster, or is there a way to sort of go beyond those boundaries, or have you set those constraints for a reason? Are you worried that that's something that you're not allowed to do? And I think as leaders, knowing when sometimes you need to set guide rails and go, within those guide rails I don't care, versus, well, no, this is it's black and white, you do that, and this is I'm telling, not sort of giving permission. I think being really clear with that, and really not prescriptive with the output, but be prescriptive of, this is the version I'm about to tell you, or I'm about to communicate to you, becomes quite important. So they know how to receive it. So I've got some freedom, and he just doesn't want me to go outside of these steps, but within that, fill my boots, or right, he's told me to do it this way. Just manages their expectations, and they know how free to be, and how one degree. Again, it's still down to, I think, how you say it, but more supportive if I give you more room to play, versus, well, no, it's not arrogant, but I'm being quite assertive because I need you to just do this. And that's the thing, I think I've not probably historically always being good enough at adapting your communication method to get the right message across, rather than the message itself is.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you think working through being more comfortable or getting, I don't want to labour the point of imposter syndrome because it's thrown about, I think, but getting to a point where you're able to see that in somebody and elevate your comms style, like you said, up your comms style to then empower them to operate slightly differently.
So. Yeah. So I think I've probably overcompensated in the past, where if I've grown up in worlds where that leadership role was a very traditional sort of command and control. So they led by being shouty or being, JFDI was sort of default, if you like, rather than more supportive, more encouraging. So then seeing people react, if I behave like that, sometimes you do it in the moment because you're stressed or it's one of 100 things. Not that that's an excuse, but it's a reality.
Mm-hmm.
I think, watching them, why have they produced that? Well, they've produced that because I've told them to produce that, or they've thought that that's what I asked for. And so being able to be, I guess, humble enough to go, okay, I'm intrigued as to why that's the thing you've come back with. So what did you hear me say? Or have I miscommunicated to you? And I think found myself more and more asking that question if the output hasn't come back in the way I had in my head. But also I think sometimes how that's developed, often I'm quite good at, in my head I can see where we need to go, where we need to be, what it looks like. I think I'm really clear in my head what I'm not always, or what I've tried to work harder at is how do I clarify that picture from my head into words so somebody can follow. And I think sometimes as a leader being able to do that, so you get them to follow but in their own way or their own speed or their own version of that, it's really important.
Yeah, I think the situations where I've been in weekly, daily, where you've worked to be in the position that you're in from a leadership perspective, and then I think your ability to be decisive is something that you probably underestimate. Something that I've had to do quite a lot of is understand that someone's struggling with something, or if you're working together with someone and they have a little bit of doubt or decision paralysis or whatever you want to call it, and then your capability of going in there thinking a little bit differently, but also then having the experience and the authority to make that decision just moves you forward so much quicker. Yeah,
I think can give them a sort of
empowerment, isn't it?
And a step up, sort of like you can do it or you can go. I think I've been really conscious that, particularly when you get to that position as well, like our CEO always says it, when you're in a leadership role, everything you say is through a megaphone, everything you do is amplified.
Totally, yeah.
And really force yourself to sort of think, about that, because then people either go, well, that's how you act when you get to director level, or that's what you're supposed to do when you get to director level. And, quite often you sort of find yourself going, well, no, don't do what I do. That's not right. So that's not a good enough excuse. You can't just opt out by going, no, don't do what I do. Every time you do something, you have to change your behaviour and act differently, because that's what they'll follow, not just the word to say, no, don't do what I do. Mm-hmm. So I am quite conscious sometimes that although other people will make a joke or make a cartoon of the sort of, Andy sells something, we'll work out what to do later. And I used to lean into that because it's all that self-depreciating view of yourself. Again, feeds the imposter syndrome, right? Yep. It's easier to take the mick out of yourself and sort of put yourself down. But I have learned to try and flip that around and go, well, no, hang on, that's, yes, we can make a joke about it, but I will think slightly differently, and that's what then brings different ideas to the table. So let's not all make a joke about me because I will go and challenge a norm or go and push or be, sort of outside of the process. There is a time and a place for that, but you lot need to recognise I do follow process as well. Mm-hmm. So it's not one or the other, it's knowing when to use it. And I think I will typically fall into the trap of just putting myself down in front of an audience and joking about stuff. So yes, CTO, I've never coded in a day in my life. What am I doing here? And that's a way of like lowering the bar almost, if you like, and sort of, for me, was a way of trying to engender myself to a technical community that code every day. But I've tried to learn, and from other people saying, yeah, but just because they've coded doesn't mean they can do your job. and sort of recognising that you're there for a reason, and don't put yourself down for things you can't do.
Recognise the value that you bring in.
Yeah,
I think pulling it back a little bit, what do you think that, like, the education system obviously went through uni, you got a degree. The world has changed significantly in the last 4 or 5 years. Obviously the pandemic and how people work and how people approach learning, everything's literally shifted massively. How do you think that education needs to respond to allow people to still, because I don't know whether we're doing enough to empower people to want to get to the point where they become a leader or they are in a position of authority, and I don't know whether that's going to change.
No.
I think there's a lot to be said for the current education system, and I think obviously I didn't go to uni, so I don't know the ins and outs in terms of like the structure of how you learn at uni. But I do think that there's a lot to be done in education to prepare people differently, certainly when it comes to leadership.
Yeah, I think so. I've got 2 sons, one in primary school, one in secondary school, and certainly the older one, he's already started thinking about what he wants to do when he's older, and it's a terrible stereotype, but he's like, I want to be rich, not I want to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Doctor, nurse, teacher, whatever. There's no profession behind that rationale or that reasoning. And then they're 2 very different boys as well. So my eldest is much more, learn and repeat, and mathematically pretty good. My youngest is much more, what's the right term? So he has neurodiverse challenges. But he loves things like art, and he can sit there for hours. And the things he comes up with in art are just like, how have you come up with that idea? But he's not. That's not really. He's not nurtured in school to do that. He'll largely do that at home or in like holiday clubs. And so he'll be challenged because he won't listen or concentrate in a class. So where's the environment best for him to nurture some of those skills to get to the point that you then, because I'm a big believer in sort of building some of those skills before you move on to leadership skills.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got something to not fall back on, but you've got a basis skill of like, well, I had to put effort into that skill, whatever it is. But I think the other thing is it's not just the school system, it's the world they've grown up in. And I say this as sort of from a world where they're very lucky in terms of how they're growing up and the world they're growing up in. But what I can't see, particularly for the older one, is a route where they start taking accountability for stuff. Everything's just given to them. It's easy.
Instant gratification. Yeah.
And that world of like, I can go online, I can watch something, and everything's in 30-second hits or whatever. Yeah. And if I need something, if your parents can afford it, Amazon will deliver it within 12 hours sort of thing. So true. Where do you have to work for anything? And I know there is a difference, and I sort of have this chat sometimes in the office with our staff. We've got quite a mix of staff, ages, backgrounds, work experience even. But for me, especially in sort of smaller businesses, the need to graft, and almost, I call it like almost survival mode, almost irregardless of how well the business is doing or what's going on, is survival. And that sounds a bit over the top, but
it's a concept I literally had a conversation about yesterday, where I've read and I've studied people in leadership positions creating fake crisis in the workplace
to drive a response.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot to be said for that mentality, and I think that is totally missing. Yeah,
and it's a weird one, because I think, so my oldest son started to see it, and more in sports, but he did see it back in the last year, first time he's had like proper exams and had to work, and all his grades, don't ask me to explain the grading system, but all of them, bar 1 or 2, went up a notch because he revised. And that took effort, that took time. It wasn't like read it the night before. We planned it in, and he sort of felt good about that. But it didn't last very long because he went back to the norm. So how do you keep embedding that? And it started to come through his sports a bit. So he started to take on new sports. And I think there is just an expectation that they arrive at whatever and they're going to be good at it, and it doesn't work like that. Or you might be good at it, but there's always going to be somebody better. So how do you respond to that? How do you fight for your place in the team? Or how do you, if you want to, he always gets the ball. Well, that's because he's playing football 5 days a week. So what are you going to do? And sometimes accepting that they're going to go nothing, well, fine. And I think with kids, you've got to find the thing that means they're going to put the effort in, versus pushing too hard. But he started playing rugby and seeing the same. It's much more technical, but can now see the improvement he makes, and that improvement comes from training and repetition and working hard at something. But outside of that, I don't know to what degree, because he's not there yet, the schooling changes enough that you've got to keep working harder and harder the more you go through. Because certainly with A levels, that was harder than GCSEs. Degree, I'd say less so. A levels was probably the hardest thing we did.
Yeah.
Degree was more sticking it out. But these days, I was talking to my wife, and I'd be comfortable at either 16 or 18 and going into work.
This was going to be my next question. I mean, as much as we're talking about education, do you think there's an argument that practical experience is more valuable?
I think so, and it depends on what the practical experience is. So we've started trying to teach, particularly the older one, and I can bring some examples from work to home, but it's less the practical, like, I don't know, being a plumber or being this or being that. It's more understanding what it takes to run a business. Mm-hmm. Not a huge amount, I'm not going to start teaching them legals and stuff like that, but, these are, everything that you do has a consequence. Mm-hmm. Everything that you do will have a consequence on somebody else. So they've either got to adapt or respond or whatever. So you can't, I think, again, because everybody sat in their bedrooms playing on computers and not interacting in the way they did, there's that lack of like visual cue of if you do something else happens, particularly with individuals and particularly within the workplace, I think. So, I think we've been quite open now that like uni's not the necessary next step. Mm-hmm. But what we'd love to do is give them the opportunity where through an apprenticeship or something like that, they build a skill, but they see what it takes to run a business. And I think they're probably, without them realising it, seeing it with us. My wife works part-time in the probation service. So that is like worlds away from what I do. But everything in terms of the effort she puts in to do that is very visible to the kids at home. Mm-hmm. Likewise, I think there is an element, and again, you look back, don't you? I probably got some of my work ethic from seeing my dad when I was a kid. There'd be times where you wouldn't see him very much because he's out early, back late, travelling with work and stuff. And you can sit there and go, well, my dad wasn't around when I was a kid, but I saw that as he worked to pay for stuff for us. And so I do think there is a bit of that, particularly as they get older and you can explain that to them. But I don't necessarily see where that comes from in the school environment. Yeah,
I think I've discussed this in the past. I think the apprenticeship programs need to offer the capability of letting people, youngsters, taste as many different things as they can, because I think that's the safest point in life.
Yes.
To try something and not like it and try something else. Yeah. But I think we've fallen into a trap of, if it's not a consistent pattern of education or jobs, or you're somewhere less than 6 months, it goes against you.
Yeah.
And I think we need to flip that, and I think we need to just completely reassess how we view that, because you should, at, 16 to 23, 24, be in a position where you can go and do as much as you possibly can, to understand where your strengths are, to understand what you like, what you don't like, what you can excel in, what you're not good at.
I think it's also seeing how things interact. So again, to go back to Syntegra, which has probably had the biggest impact on me in terms of work, I think, there's a 2-year graduate program, and every 6 months you moved around the business. Now you could choose, but it was highly encouraged that the next 6 months wasn't the same as the previous 6 months. So learning actually different parts of the business, but there's so much you can't fit in four lots of 6 months. And then by the time you got to the end of the fourth one, you were starting to go, well, actually, can I go back to the second one? Because I actually really enjoyed that. Mm-hmm. But now I know how that fits in because I've just done this. So it was a mix of like internal core teams, marketing, finance, stuff like that, and then delivery teams. And then that would be by specialism, like a, type of skill, so a security consultant or a process consultant or whatever. So you could then see how, well, when you're designing a process, you need to consider, particularly in that world, it was technology, you need to consider security implications. So, and I think they did a brilliant job of always going, like, I know you're operating in this box for the next 6 months, but let me explain how your box operates with all the other boxes around them. Now, I don't need you to go and figure it out and get too involved, but you doing this has an impact upstream and downstream, above and below, and all that sort of stuff, which was, that was at 21. So getting that exposure, and it was a proper big business, 5,000 people globally. So it wasn't a little bit of exposure. I doubt you'd get that in an Accenture, really, or the like. But it was brilliant, I think, for then going, actually, I want to do that on my own. My second job out of uni, having done that, was setting my own business. Yeah. Which my dad thought was nuts, but I think I felt quite prepared for it, weirdly. So, I think being able to, giving kids, it's even down things like money, right? And understanding money and the impact of money. They don't do that in school, but again, because everything's virtual. So I tap my phone, money's just there. I press go on a computer, money's there. It's, needing to work for it. Again, it comes back a lot, I think, in my head anyway, to go, it's hard out there. You've got to work hard, and particularly if you want to stand out. But I don't know that they do want to stand out.
No, and I don't know whether that's through a lack of knowing what that actually means. Because, like you say, they're behind screens. They're socially not as engaged with like real life experiences as they were 5-10 years ago. So I don't know how that's going to improve, if at all.
It was an interesting. I'd not thought about that, but standing out online is behind an avatar. So you can design your avatar what you want it to look like. And I would imagine those who are more worried about that sort of stuff will create avatars that are a million miles away from what they're like in the real world.
Absolutely, yeah.
But go and do that in the real world. How do you stand out, and do it confidently? But I'm not. It's an interesting one. I'm not sure. I don't know about you, but I wasn't taught to stand out. But sort of felt like not needed to, but you want to get heard. I wanted to be known for something, and I think I always wanted to run my own business. I can't explain why, and it wasn't sort of against the system or anything like that. I just always wanted to run my own business. But I think it's because I wanted to control my own destiny.
Yep, I can totally relate to that. I think the one thing that I would bring to the table for empowering that through school would be public speaking.
Yes.
I think if we taught public speaking in schools, we'd see a shift, because it builds confidence. It puts people in a position of being able to go and interview well, for example. It's just a huge advantage. And I think those practical skills are just missing.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. My eldest, who started secondary school, 18 months ago, they do like a year rep thing, and even in year 7, so first year of secondary school, they offer it out, and that's the whole year. And he, for some unknown reason, he went, I'll have a go at that. And so they get a long list, whittle it down, whatever, and then you have to write a speech, and you have to get up in front of the whole year, which is like 250 kids, and then give your speech, and you've got like 60 seconds, so you can't really say a lot in 60 seconds. And 2 days before, he was like, I'm fine. I'm like, well, I don't know where he gets this confidence from, because I'm not like that. And like my wife always goes, well, it's you. It's like, it's definitely you, because you're gobby. But where's he got that confidence from? He's never done anything like that before. And again, I don't know whether that's a naivety. Because I was like, have you prepared for this? He's like, well, what do I need to prepare for? It's like, so just picture yourself stood in front of your hall in front of 250 kids. And 2 days before, he's like, Dad, I need your help to write a speech.
All right, yeah.
So we did a bit of prep, and he practiced it, and it's like, right, practice it without the paper. And exactly as like you said, he had to prepare for something. It wasn't instant. Didn't just go and do it. And that prep, and I think the feeling of fear. So he could look like a fool. He could get it wrong, and to some degree, he lets that wash over him. I think then deep down, he probably feels it, as most people would. But he got picked for year rep off his speech, and so he was like bouncing off that. It's like, well, you trying to explain to him though that you got that because you prepared and you put some effort in.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just lost.
Wants to be nonchalant about it.
Yeah. And I don't know whether that's just an age thing and sort of like
Yeah.
whatever. But it's those lessons, I think, that start building that prep to face into things that you're fearful of.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, that's what running a business is often like. It's fearful, and you've got to...
it's unknown, isn't it?
Yeah.
Largely.
And you've just got to be... What's that phrase? You've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's why the rugby's been quite good. He's put off playing a game. And you just got to rip the plaster off and go for it. And it's going to hurt, and it's going to be painful, and you're going to be out of breath. But you get the satisfaction at the end. But all of that takes effort. And I think that's been something that started to click a bit as he's got to like more early teenage years of sort of, if you want something bad enough, you have to put effort in. I just don't think they want anything bad enough. That's the problem.
No, I don't think people of that age are capable of thinking beyond the short term because they're so conditioned to get everything immediately.
Yeah. Even when he saves up for pocket money, it's just like, I spend it as soon as I've got it. So, but there's that lack of, the need to work towards a goal.
Yep.
And again, it might be, as they get older, they appreciate that and can look further ahead. But I think you're right. So we didn't have that growing up. We didn't have something you can get in 30 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever. Took me 18 months of 4 paper rounds to save up for my first mountain bike. It's like, you wouldn't even dream of doing that.
Yeah, but it felt good when you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But how we can build that like work ethic back in, I think, is going to be a challenge.
Super challenge. So bringing it back onto business, what businesses can do in terms of empowering the next sort of wave of people that are capable of delivering in leadership roles, certainly the people that fall into the category of being like unconventional thinkers or that feel like they're unconventional thinkers. What would you say that businesses could be doing better?
So I think there's like structural stuff, and then there's probably behavioural stuff. If I think of my own experience, so like things like apprenticeships and stuff like that to bring younger generations in, probably younger generations that have not been worn down by work because they'll think in a certain way. It's like trying to teach an old dog new tricks, right? Because they probably have a freedom of thought that we might not have. Being able to do that, I think, as a business owner, that's quite hard though sometimes because you sit there and go, well, the cost of that versus the value. It's often quite a hard equation to figure out. I'd challenge people, we're going through it internally. How do we actually make that work? So again, rather than going, it's just a cost and I can't see beyond the cost, how do we think towards the value and then try and justify the cost of it rather than the other way around? I think it should be called a benefit cost analysis, not a cost benefit analysis, because it defaults you to think of the cost. So there's a bunch of stuff like that. I think even, I use apprenticeship quite loosely. So Oakland has typically grown up over the last 5 or 6 years of a junior person to us is somebody who's already had a job. So they've already been, bled in through another graduate program. So they've probably got 1, maybe 2 years of experience. We're trying to challenge that internally to go almost pre-job. So you're 16 to 18-year-old. How do we make that happen? And I think weirdly, you sort of need processes and structures in place to protect the business, protect the individual, protect the teams, protect your clients so that works. So, right at the start, there's talking about that sort of clash of worlds. You need some of those things to create the freedom in a way. So you couldn't do it without the right health and safety sort of things in place. We couldn't do it probably until recently because the way we ran projects was very emergent. We were still learning ourselves how to run a tech project. That's not the business's background. So dropping in somebody that didn't know what they were doing at all into a process and a team who sort of knew what they were doing but didn't have a process to manage it would have been disastrous. And everybody would have had a bad experience and then you'd never do it again. So having some controls and some structures and some processes, I think, creates freedom because you can manage it, if you like, rather than completely uncontrolled. I think there is a behaviour switch though as well. So how do we think in a way And again, it's hard when you run a business and you spend a lot of time looking at numbers and risk and all that sort of stuff. But how do we think in a opportunity way? So how do we get people like that into the business? What do we think is the opportunity? How do we talk to them in a way that is opportunistic rather than, when you can't do that, and don't do that, and if you want to do do it that way, and because that would typically be our default, because you've grown up in that very structured environment, I think. And you need to do it in a way that you don't scare them, I think, and sort of keep encouraging them to be brave. And I think we were doing a leadership session last week, and it was one of our key strap lines from the day. So this is the core, what we have as a SLT, and then we've got like an extended leadership community. And what came out was this whole notion of like learning to hold on light, rather than completely let go or hold on tight. It's like, how do you hold on light? And so it's back to having enough structure controls, but giving people freedom is a mindset shift, I think. And I think for many people, the last year or so has been pretty tough. It's really hard to do that when you're coming out of a period where it's been really tough and you have to hold on tighter to stuff. Yeah. So, how do you flip that switch in people to think differently in that sort of environment? But I think you need both. You need that structures, processes, systems, quite controlled things, and then an environment that allows that to blossom. Is quite important. And so we've been thinking, we can put some of the process in, but I need the right people to run it, and they're people that are not necessarily process driven. So we can put in the tram lines, but then I need energetic people. I need big thinkers. I need people that are going to challenge some of the norms for the apprentices to follow. And those apprentices that arrive might be process driven. They'll find their way, and those that aren't will find their way as well. But you've got to be careful who you put in front of them, who you buddy them up with, because that will become their like view of what normal is or what Oakland is, which we've got to be quite mindful of, I think.
We rolled something out about a year ago called, it's just called experimentation. It's just a way of controlling failure, basically, in a safe way. And the one thing that we're constantly reinforcing is we want you to feel comfortable making commercially viable mistakes so that we can learn. And trying to get people to grasp the concept has been the trickiest bit. Like the process and the framework for it, everybody understands, but the comfort level of the outset, and the purpose being, I want to get some failure here, they just completely challenged the mind in a way that just was unexpected. But it's something that we're trying to really push for, lifting people up and feeling like they've got the autonomy and they've got the freedom within this framework to go out and do something that might seem on the face of it unconventional.
Does that challenge so as the guy who runs the place, how did that feel for you? Did that challenge your like this is quite scary and I've got to hold on more?
I would use your analogy of hold on light. I think it was purposeful, and it was designed in a way to keep us as current as we can be with the speed in which things move. And it's taken a long time for people to feel comfortable pushing the boundaries of what they're actually testing. But from my perspective, I've got enough experience to look at something and understand the potential downfall or negative that could come out of it. And I think that context is important when you're giving people that freedom and that flexibility. But it's something that's worked really well, and I think people are slowly starting to pass that down as well. I'm noticing heads of departments taking that same approach and that same empowerment and really trying to push people to deliver on controlled learning and failure.
I think we've learned that even the littlest things you say will impact how somebody reacts.
100%.
So we had an example where somebody came to the SLT to ask permission for 4 train tickets to go to a Microsoft event in London. And we were all a bit taken aback as why have they asked for permission? It's Microsoft, and we've got a partnership with Microsoft and all the rest of it. I was like, well, because not that long ago we were telling people to be mindful of what, where we were spending money, what we were spending money on. So we've said that for a while. We've not really changed the narrative on that for obvious reasons. So it's sort of expected that they would come, I don't know, wrong time of day, 4 train tickets to London's best part of £1,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that all adds up. And so in some ways you want them to come and ask.
Mm-hmm.
And me and one of the other directors were chatting. It's like, I wonder would we have reacted differently had they just gone and done it? And sort of challenging our thinking like that. If they come back and they'd put in an expense bill for £1,000, would we have hit the roof? And one of us said no. I was like, really? Would you without knowing they were about to spend £1,000? So it's less sort of, I don't want them to just go off and do it. I don't want them to ask permission. So what do we want them to do? Well, the sort of middle ground in that is be like ask as a presumptive close. So I am going to do this. I'm about to press buy. Has anybody got a reason for me not to? So you've sort of set an expectation and communicated you're going to do it. You've given people an out, but you've done it in a much more assertive way, and the individual involved can feel empowered, but not controlled. Mm-hmm. So again, that was a great example of where we've jumped to two ends of a spectrum, like complete freedom, go and spend £1,000, don't give a toss, or no, you have to come and get everything signed off by me. It's like, well, how do we teach people to be somewhere in the middle? They're not asking permission, but they're telling you they're going to do it. So there's a audit trail, but they still feel empowered that they've come up with that idea and that decision. So that was a good example of where, I think default, particularly again with the 4 of us as directors, how we react, how we jump to ends of a spectrum, rather than the 4 of us then challenge each other and we end up in a middle ground. What was really interesting is how you look at your behaviours in certain situations. So I was the one who went, no, you can't spend that, and normally I'd be the opposite. Whereas another director who would, basically we swap places. And it was really interesting, again, if you take a step back and observe yourself, it's like, why have I done that and you've done the opposite? And it was our reaction to, obviously we're privy to a load more information because we run the business every day. And it's how we react to sort of stressful situations or certain situations that will often see us do the opposite of what we normally do. Mm-hmm. So that was really interesting as well. But again, why I think the 4 of us work, because generally we balance each other out pretty well. You've sort of got, although we're all quite different, all 4, there's probably 2 of us who are a bit more similar and to them a bit more similar. So you then balance each other out that way as well. So it's really interesting. You do the whole Myers-Briggs type stuff, and we do cover the circle between the 4 of us quite well. That doesn't mean we've got everything covered, by the way. So,
no, but it's good. We've got 4 directors. It's good to have a different perspective.
Yeah.
And it's good to challenge each other, I think.
Yeah. I think it's also good to challenge ourselves as a unit that we don't know all the answers. Mm-hmm. So rather than assuming we do and it should come from one of the 4 of us, go, actually, no, we need somebody else in this conversation. And I think we've got better at doing that. We've had to look outside of the 4 of us to make even better decisions, particularly as the business has got bigger.
Yeah.
Because we don't, start off as the 4 of us, that grows to a dozen, and that first tranche of employees are probably just in the mirror of us. And as you get bigger, the people who are involved in recruitment, you do recruitment better and all the rest of it. The more recent employees are further and further away from what it looks like to be the 4 of us, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And we wouldn't grow if we were trying to just next 4 of us. But that means you have to involve people in decision making in a way that we didn't before. So that's been quite enlightening as well.
Okay, so to finish off, we do what's called quick fire round, or this and that. 3 quick questions, more first thing that comes to mind, I guess, as opposed to just one word answers. So process or intuition, which do you rely on more?
Probably intuition, personally.
Yeah,
I think.
Experience or qualifications?
Experience, but if I answer those in the other way around, I'd say my ability to go with intuition has come from experience.
Nice. Okay. Yep. If you could tell your younger self one thing about leadership, what would it be?
I think it's don't try and lead alone. So I think it was, where we started, sort of finding your place and being comfortable in your own skin has taken a long time, but sort of accepting that the 4 directors work because it's the 4 of us, but equally as we've got bigger, and where we were just finishing before, that leadership has to extend beyond the 4 of us, and so on and so forth. And I mean, it's lonely when there's 4 of you, let alone if there's 1 of you. Our CEO carries a lot on his shoulders. We work very hard to always remind him that he's not alone. But I think it works on a number of levels for me. It's like gives a balanced view to things. I think sometimes diversity is so helpful in a business, and diversity comes in many different forms. Mm-hmm. So there's diversity in background. I would say in many, many aspects we are not diverse at all. We're 4 men between 45 and 55, all white, all similar background. But actually, if you pick our backgrounds apart, the backgrounds are all very different. So we're completely not diverse. But from running a business perspective, we're quite diverse. But we've expanded that out. So as we've got bigger, our next leadership group, which is then another 5 people, is different. Next tier down from that, different again. And so I think that's the biggest thing. I, again, go back to the start when I said I always wanted to run my business. In my head, it was always me running a business. And I'd still like to experience that. I'd still like to experience being a chief exec one day, maybe. But certainly I think the reason Oakland works well is because it's not just one person making all the decisions and trying to lead on their own. Like Richard, our CEO, does a good job of leading from the front, but it works because then his supporting cast, if you like, is quite tight.
Good answers. Andy, thank you very much.
Thank you.